to think that it wasn't allowed to talk about, because I know what it felt like growing up not being able to talk about it.
Well, Linda, I got to ask you, I mean, when you found out this was going on with your children, how did you feel emotionally? Something was, that they're being contacted. I mean, weren't you worried about them being more than contacted, maybe experimented on DNA or whatever being taken from them?
There was only one time that I was a little concerned, and that's when my oldest son woke up with a bloody, his right, one of his nostrils, I forgot if it was the right or left. He woke up one morning, it was kind of like almost sealed with crusty blood, and his pillow, he had shoved it into the window that was right by his bed. That was the only time that I was a little concerned, because he seemed very scared from that experience. He was about 9. As far as anything else, no. I was kind of, it sounds weird to say, but I was kind of glad that they were having experiences, because it made me feel like, okay, so what I was experiencing as a kid really did happen, and I'm not completely crazy.
Yeah, but did you ever try to decipher what happened to him that night he had the bloody nose and he seemed to be upset? I mean, as a parent, were you really...
I did. I asked him why the pillow was in the window, and he said because the eyes were staring at me and they were mad. And he said that they were red eyes, and that's all he remembers. But he said at first there was a spinning, he used the word top, like the toys, the tops. He said there was a spinning top, and then it turned into red eyes that were glowing and staring at him, and it looked mad. And that's why he covered the window with his pillow.
Interesting.
Yeah. My younger son had an experience when he was younger. It was very, very, very detailed for a 6-year-old kid. And he actually told the story to a UFO investigator that we had come to the house from the Long Island UFO Network. He remembers being abducted. He remembers being in a very large white room. He was laying on an exam table. There were about 3 beings around him, but he said when he turned and he saw the rest of the room, there were 3 tanks, large tanks with blue liquid in them, and in it were myself, my ex-husband, and his brother, the older brother that had the bloody nose. He also said that they took his brother out of the tank to be next to him, and then he was explaining, the aliens were explaining to the boys what was going to happen. And I just thought it was an extremely detailed explanation for a 6-year-old at the time.
Oh, wow. Now, going to you, Richard, how about you? I mean, you basically saying you had all positive encounters. How many times have you personally think you've been abducted, and have you ever had regression done?
Okay, that's a good question to bring up here. I've had what I describe in my book series. I call it "The More, the Mason, and the Alien." That's the title of the books, and I talk about how from the age of 21 on, when it was more apparent and I was more aware of what was happening, there were several occasions where these experiences turned into conversations between the praying mantis type being, which I refer to in the book as the crone. I just call her the crone, and myself. And sometimes those conversations would turn into episodes and experiences. Other times she would just show up and say, "We have to go do something. I need you." Or, "It's time to learn something. I need to show you." And that would happen. So in a lot of the cases it would be during the evening, but there were also times where when I started putting these experiences and the things I was learning into my artwork, even before I started writing the books, I was doing the artwork, and that was years ago at the beginning to mid-'90s when I was at Old Westbury College in New York. And I would even have experiences there even while I was doing the artwork. Prior to even starting to do my artwork at the studio at college, I was actually starting to do artwork in the basement at my parents' house when I was living with them. And there was one particular, I guess you would call it kind of like a lucid dreaming episode, where one of the paintings I was doing, it's the one I have it on my website. It's the one called Laboratory, Examining the Human Animal. And it's the image of 3 aliens. It's done in a 3-dimensional manner. And the reason it's done like that is because the viewer, whoever looks at the painting, you're put in the position of where you're the one being examined. So you're automatically on the laboratory table being examined because they're coming at you out of the painting. And I remember one night doing that, I would be up to all hours of the night just working away at the paintings, because all of a sudden it became this undying obsession. I had to do them. And I must have, even though I thought I was still awake, I must have passed into this lucid dreaming episode. And one such entity or alien came into the basement, walked up next to me, leaned over. Mind you, I still think I have my eyes open and I'm awake, but I'm really not. I'm sitting there thinking I'm doing the painting, but I'm not. And it leaned over, looked at the painting like it was, approving it or examining it. And then it looked up at me straight on, face to face. And that's when I came to, was knocked out of the lucid dream sequence and realized, I was out of it for a little bit. And yet I was still sitting there with my paintbrush in hand, but I hadn't been really doing anything because I had slipped into that lucid state. So there's episodes like that where they'll just show up wherever you are. I've also learned to be careful what I ask for in terms of learning things, because going back to what I mentioned before about coming from opposite sides of the aisle, the contactee versus the abductee and so forth, and the different types of experiences, I had actually gone to the crone one day and said, look, what is going on here? I'm not having the same experiences as these other people are. They're getting hammered and abused, and what is going on with them? I said, I need to understand this. And she looked at me and she says, you're sure about this, right? Okay. And I said, yes, I need to know. So she put me into a scenario to understand all the fear and anguish and physical and mental abuse that one would go through in that kind of I guess you'd say, a more malevolent or abusive experience. Mm. And she pulled me out of it at the very end and yanked me out of it. I won't get into it in detail here because it gets kind of gruesome, but basically she pulls me out of it at the very end when things were at their worst and stands me right next to her. And I'm still feeling the raw pain of what's going on with my doppelganger who is laying on the laboratory table. And she looks down at me and says to me, next time, be careful what you ask for. And that was the end of that. She says, now you know. Now you know how the other half lives. And she says, this is what I am training you for, so you can stand up to that. And she says, this is why I'm taking you through all this psychological training, all this historical training, all this education, so that you know how to combat this and how to stand up to it.
Interesting. But why you? And why Linda?
You're always going to have, I guess, many years ago when my professors at art school would ask me that, I'd be like, well, look at it this way. You're always going to have the control group and the experimental group, okay? You're always going to have that certain section, block, or lot of the human race that you pick out to be the ones to test, to see if we have what it takes to move on to the next level in our evolution. Do we have the ability to stand up for ourselves? Do we have the ability to feel empathy for our fellow human beings, not just the next door neighbor, but the person on the other side of the planet too? You know, it's a case of, are we going to be selfish misanthropes, or are we going to go out into the world and be representatives of the human race? So this is why certain, and you'll hear other people talk about this too. I'm sure I'm not the only one, but there are specific bloodlines on the planet that have been followed generation after generation for this reason, to watch the evolution of our social traits, our cultural traits, our mannerisms, our growth spiritually, and also technologically. It's all about the human condition.
Yeah, but
yeah, go ahead.
What I see right now, if I was sitting there trying to figure out how humans function right now, if we want to save and enlight humans right now, what is going on right now in Washington, D.C., I'm ashamed right now to even call myself a human, because, I mean, what has been going on, the last few years is scary. So, I mean, have they addressed anything like on politics to you guys about what our future is, the way it's going? Because it's looking bleak right now.
I could go into a great amount of detail about the politics, but I won't, because
that's a whole other show.
I made a promise to my wife not to go on a rant tonight and be nice about things. So what I am going to say is this: yes, if you're going to be a representative of the human race, you're going to get involved with politics, locally, nationally, and globally, because let's face it, the root word of politics is polity, and polity means people. So the politics is about the people, and it's the economics of numbers. So it's always going to come down to that. And as far as speaking in very simplistic, grossly simplistic terms, the bad guys know that they're being backed into a corner, and they're squealing like a bunch of stuck pigs, Washington, D.C. included, okay? So when they know they're outnumbered and outgunned, and they're backed into a corner, they're going to scream the loudest and cause the most chaos and the most ruckus just out of spite before their flame goes out. And there's a great line from the movie Blade Runner, when Rutger Hauer, who is essentially the Frankenstein's monster, goes home to his creator, which is the corporate master. And the corporate master, his creator, confronts him and says, the light bulb always burns brightest before it goes out. And he says, you, my dear friend, are burning very brightly right now. So those who scream the loudest, those who burn the brightest, that's because they're about to go out and be squelched for good.
Okay, well,
and
we need
the most optimistic answer I can give about that.
Okay, Richard, we need to go on break, and then we got a 5-minute newscast after the break, so you got about 8 minutes to, relax before we come back. And when we come back, let's talk about your book and your other books for the last half an hour. You're listening to Night Dreams Talk Radio After Dark. Our guest tonight is Richard and Linda Smith. They're going to be talking about The Kings Are Coming. You're listening to, me, Gary, and everybody. Be careful out there if you're driving, going out looking for gifts.